Good evening, and thank you for joining us for another segment of Balanced Living. We're so glad that you can join us. You guys are pretty much experts at our platform already, but we just want to remind you that if you have or want any one of our resources, you can click on the Notes tab and you can find it there. We also just want to remind you that if there's anything that we can pray for you, click on the Request Prayer button, and there'll be someone right away that will be able to pray with you. We're glad that you can be here with us. We have a special program as always. And as we get started with our health nugget piece, we're going to be talking about the importance of the environment. And here with us, we have Art Miller, who is a professor here at our Indiana Academy. He's the science teacher there, and he's here with us. So I want to welcome Art Miller here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art, for taking some time out of your day to give us some knowledge of the importance of the environment. So, why should we take care of the environment anyway?
Well, that's a good question. When you think about it, in the beginning, when God created the world, he created the Garden of Eden, and he put man there to tend and keep it. In Genesis 2:15, it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. So right from the very beginning, we were placed here to tend, to manage, to take care of the earth and everything in it. So it was God's expectations, and it was for our own good, our blessing. When I was about 12 years old, my dad gave me a pocket knife, and it was my grandfather's pocket knife, so it was special to me. It had been my grandfather's, my dad's, and that was mine. It was shiny, it was nice, and it had a knife and a can opener and a screwdriver, all kinds of neat things on it, and it was very special to me. And so I had that knife, I used it, I enjoyed it, but I didn't always put it back in the same place, and I lost it. And so I paid the consequences. So it's the same thing with our earth. If we take care of the earth, we will have it to enjoy, and so will our descendants after us. But if we don't take care of it, we lose the resources, it becomes polluted, we suffer the consequences. So in the beginning, God created the world, and he wanted us to take care of it. And here at the end, in Revelation, it says we're doing his will when we take care of the earth. Matter of fact, in Revelation 11:18, it says, when he judges the world, he'll destroy those who destroy the earth. That's pretty serious. So it is important to God. It's very important to him for our own good.
So, we realize that this is something that God has really given us that responsibility to take care of the environment from the beginning and all the way to the end. But, what are some ways that we can take care of the environment? What does that look like?
Yeah, so everybody has their own idea. Some people think of it as reducing pollution, taking care of endangered species, recycling, all kinds of things like that. The list could go on and on. But what is it? We have a unique perspective as Christians, and that is that the world is on loan to us from God. So we are managers. We're managers of it. And so we shouldn't be wasting natural resources, exploiting it. We shouldn't pollute the environment. When we take care of it, and we have a clean environment, we benefit. We have good health. For instance, also in 1 Corinthians 3:16, it says, "Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy." Our bodies, the earth is something we have to take care of. Our bodies we need to take care of in the same way. And when we take care of the earth, make sure it's not polluted, make sure the water is clean, the land is used well, we're taking care of our own bodies by getting out there and getting exercise, making sure that the water we take in and the food we take in isn't polluted and going to hurt us. There were some researchers in Yellowstone National Park. Back in 1925, all the wolves were killed off. And they were doing some research, and in 1995, they reintroduced the wolf. And it's called the keystone species. The park had suffered because of this. There was all kinds of erosion. the beavers, the reptiles, all these things were suffering and in decline. But once they reintroduced that wolf, initially it appeared that all this hinged on the wolf, because the beavers started to come back, the vegetation came back, the elk were pushed away, so there wasn't as much erosion, and everything seemed to become more balanced again. And so they were like, okay, so originally they wanted to kill off all the wolves. Now they're like, oh, let's bring all the wolves back. They did more study on it, and it was a little bit more complicated than that. But the point still stood that getting rid of, wiping out the wolves, wiping out one thing can have a great impact on the rest of the environment. So what does it mean to take care of the environment? Well, it means taking care of what you have around you. We all can't go down and do research on Yellowstone. We can't all do that. But you and I can take care of ourselves. We can take care of our bodies, number one. We can take care of our homes and the area around our homes, and do things that that we can see around us that need to be done. That's what it means to take care of the environment.
I know that you mentioned, in a broad aspect, that there's pollution. Our oceans sometimes need to be cleaned. Heck, maybe even our own streets need to be cleaned, and how all of these things really interact with one another. So what would you say are some practical things that you and I can do on our day-to-day lives that can really help with this?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, off the right from the start, how about reducing waste? There's three things: reduce, reuse, recycle. So reduce waste. I think it's best to use as little disposable things as possible. Why? Because it fills up the landfills. It's documented that these things happen. A lot of these plastic things go into the ocean, are causing problems in the ocean. So try to use as little disposable items as possible. Reduce waste by being temperate. It's easy as Americans here in this country to waste food, to waste things, to waste all kinds of things. So be aware of how much waste we're producing. Try reusing things. It's unbelievable how many things get thrown away that just need a part fixed, or a belt done, like a vacuum cleaner. That people throw things away, vacuum cleaners away, that just needed a belt fixed. And so maybe we should think a little bit more, is this something that can be fixed? Or is this an item that can be reused in a different way? Or is it something that someone else can use rather than just throw in the trash? Recycling. That's on the rise. The numbers are going up. A lot more people are recycling now than used to. But a very large portion of what goes in landfills is yard waste and food. And so going back to the reducing waste, we need to think about the amount of food we're wasting. Can we, if we make a big meal and maybe instead of throwing the leftovers away, use it for a lunch another day. Yard waste, people can compost instead of just putting all that in the landfill. We do a little bit of that at home here. So those are some things. Recycling is a big one, I think. Those are some practical things that we can do. I mean, you can go on the internet, and I just typed in Google it. I came up with 20 off the top of my head, or off the first list, 20 things that you can do. So I would say those are some practical things: recycling, evaluate our own things that we do at home as far as trash, and reusing. In our family, we have a saying: use it up, wear it out, make it last, or do without. So those are some things.
Well, thank you so much. I think everyone has heard that phrase at some point, use, reuse, recycle. And I think it's a matter of how much are we putting that actually into practice in our day-to-day lives. So, thank you for sharing that. But, what are some things that are going on in our community that we can perhaps do or join in? What would you say?
There's one thing I'm excited about right here in our community. I teach at a school, and I teach science. So biology is one of the sciences. In my class, there's a citizen science program. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to have anything to be involved in this, except an interest and a passion for it. It's free. We go out and we sample the water in our local stream. I take my students out and we do this. And then we analyze the water for chemicals, nitrogen and phosphorus and various things. And we record that data and we put it on a state website. The state then looks at this data because they have data points all over the state of Indiana. They look at this and they evaluate it and say, okay, this stream looks good, this watershed looks good. Oh, there's a problem in such and such a place. The pollution level has gone up. There's a lot of nitrogen or phosphorus in the water. So we're contributing to that by having the students get involved, learn how to do it, and we actually go down there, we get in the water, and we, sample it, and they enjoy it, I enjoy it, and it's giving back. It's giving back to the community. We benefit because the students are learning. They really learn biology that way. It sticks. They understand why they're doing it. They understand that if the water is polluted in the stream, that can seep into the groundwater. And then we're benefiting by being out in nature, getting exercise, fresh air. So it's a win-win all around. But that's one thing that's going on in our community. It's very important that they understand that the nitrogen and the phosphorus from soaps, from farm runoff, from all these different things is reduced, because if it's not, like I said, it can seep into the groundwater, but you can have algal blooms that kill off fish. People can get sick from drinking water that's contaminated. All kinds of different problems that can be caused by this. And so this is a program that's going on in our community. I mean, people can get involved with that as well.
Well, there's definitely a couple of things that we can do, in our community that perhaps, join a larger scale of things that are happening. So thank you so much for that. And lastly, I think for a lot of us, we just throw things in the trash and it just kind of disappears from then on. But, if we don't take care of our environment, what can happen?
Well, I'll tell you what is happening. It's 50%, nearly 50% of our tropical and temperate rainforests are gone. They're chopped down, they're bulldozed. Things are becoming extinct at an alarming rate. Thousands of species every year. We have transportation of native species are being pushed out by invasive species, and so what's going to happen if we don't take care of these things? Just as an example, 1 in 7 human deaths in 2012 resulted from exposure to soil, water, and air pollution. So human death, all kinds of things. And we don't have time to go into it, but if we don't take care of it, we're going to suffer the consequences in a big way. More human deaths, more deaths to plants and animals. When you've lost a species, it's not coming back. So that's what can happen, and that's where we're headed if we don't do something.
I think, that could make us really reflect on, hey, throwing this thing that I think I don't need, or, throwing just stuff and thinking that it's completely gone can really affect not just our community, but the world. So thank you so much for the reminder. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. And thank you for joining us, Mr. Miller.
You're welcome.
Well, as we have just heard, I think all of us can do our small part to make the world a better place. And maybe that can just start by recycling water bottles. But I think we all have a choice and a decision to make today. Do I want to be a blessing to the world or a curse? And today's topic, as we're going to go into our presentation, talks about just that in a very personal way, which is entitled Taking Charge of Your Health. It's going to be presented by Pastor Aaron Clark, and here with us with the presentation, Take Charge of Your Health.
Hello, and thank you for joining us again for Balanced Living. I want to thank you, Pastor Chris. Thank you, Art, for that information and that challenge. And it's exciting to be back together as we have taken an in-depth look, really, at the connection of our spiritual and our physical life. And it's been exciting to look at these principles that we find. In fact, some of them very simple and very practical, yet how much of an impact they can make in our everyday life in experiencing not only joy and happiness, but optimal health as well. So we're going to continue by kind of tying this together, asking the question, and making the appeal and challenge for us to take charge of our health. Now, when we hear that, that's an interesting challenge because it's putting the onus back on where it really should be, and that's for myself, for yourself, to be able to put into practice or take the steering wheel as it relates to our own health. And so we're going to look at this, but we've looked at these very basic principles, and what we want to discover is how all this ties together in what God intended for us from the beginning. So we have done our best to try and really illustrate and highlight the connection that exists in our bodies and in our minds, that we're really not just physical beings and not just a separation of what it takes to have health versus what it takes to be happy, fulfilled, and purpose-driven in a religious and Christ-centered spiritual experience. Now, it's an interesting thing to note that most people, if they were just looking at the object facts and they didn't want to have pain and they wanted to live a longer life and they wanted to experience strength and the ability to do things without debilitating disease or chronic sickness or frustration, most people would choose that. So inherently within us, we have this desire for something better, for something more. But it isn't just that internal desire that we've been highlighting. We find, in fact, and if you want to click the Bible tab right now, for those of you on that platform, in John chapter 10, verse 10, we find a spiritual promise about Jesus himself. And it says, the thief, talking about the enemy, Satan, comes not but just to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus says, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. If you think about that, God doesn't want us to just have a basic survival existence in this experience of life. He wants us to have a next level, a full, as much as possible, to the limits, pushing the limits, growing, abundant life. So we see those two things coming together in the spiritual and the physical connection between our health. So when we look at taking charge of our health, we're really looking at the power of choice. Really, all of the information in the world and all of the statistics that exist on what happens if you drink more water and if you get enough rest and if you eat proper health, we can look at that and give practical, scientific, verified evidence to the reality that those things will be a benefit, and many times take just a little bit of determination and reapplication in our lives to experience that benefit. But if I never actually choose to do anything about it, then that power is never mine. And so really, we're going to be focusing for the next few minutes in this evening's presentation on really just how pivotal taking charge, personal responsibility for our health is. You know, to quote one of our former presidents, I believe our 40th president, Ronald Reagan, he says, if you don't make your own decisions, someone else will make them for you. And it's so true. We can't just put cruise control on our lives and expect to experience the benefits that these simple principles will give us if we follow them in putting them into practice in our lives. Now, the interesting thing about choice is that if we look at choice, we're going to look at this from both of these angles. We're going to look at it from the spiritual side, and then we're going to look at it from the practical or my portion of what this choice is. And choice becomes key to who we are. You see, the first step in any change in our life, no matter what that change is a choice to do so. And when we think about that choice really takes on a spiritual significance because we have been created as free moral agents. Our brains, we're not just mammals. I mean, there's popular songs, secular songs that would try and demote humanity down to a level that we are just mammals in that chain. Evolution has promoted that. But when we really look at the connection spiritually and what the Bible has to say about that, this gift of choice becomes key to this whole experience and actually realizing the blessings that God would have for us in our individual life. And the reason we find right here in the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26 and verse 27 gives, from a biblical perspective, the reason that choice is the first step in any change that we would experience in any platform of our life, health being no different. And we find that you and I, according to the biblical perspective, were created in the image of God. We were given the ability to choose. We were given a power, a dominion, an authority over the creative works. We were set apart from animals. In fact, if you were to look at the science behind that, even in the way our brains are made up, in the frontal lobe, the part where we actually employ what we're talking about tonight in taking charge of our health, and that is reason and choice, our frontal lobes are significantly larger than even especially the animal classes that we would call the most intelligent, for example, like a chimpanzee. And the frontal lobe of our brains actually account for about 33% of our brain. And it's a much significant jump compared to some of those animals that were mentioned. So you can check that out. You can even click a Google search on that. Don't just take my word for it. But we have been given this gift of choice. Now I want you to think about that, because one of the key things, we have songs about it, we have movies about it, we have books about it, we talk about it all the time. One of the primary pursuits and one of the singular ingredients to people experiencing joy in their lives is love. We have songs about all it takes is love. We have songs about how all we would pursue is love. And if you think about that, choice and love are significantly tied together, because if there were no choice, if the first step in my experience towards anything wasn't a choice, then real love could not exist. And that's where the spiritual side of our health comes into play, because God has given you and I the freedom and the power to choose what we're going to do. We were created in God's image. The Bible reveals that He is actually love. And while we link these two things together in taking charge of our health, it's important to note that if true love didn't exist, if the freedom to actually engage in this trusting experience didn't exist, then true happiness couldn't exist as well. Now, I share this because I think that's something we all can think about from an objective, intrinsic reality that is built within us. That we understand that there's certain elements to relationship that have to exist, and freedom in that is a key piece, because I can't experience a real, healthy relationship if I don't have a choice on whether or not I am going to be in that relationship. So gun to my head change is not the kind of change that we can ever experience joy and fulfillment from. And we think about that, that's a key point in what we're talking about this evening when we're looking at the practical reality of taking charge of our health. Right? And so when we think about that, I know I've said that a couple times, but really think about what that means. That means I'm at the steering wheel, and unless I actually make some choices to or not to do certain things, I will never have a different situation than the one that I'm in right now. And for some of us, that's a good thing, but for some of us, that would be a really sad situation, because we could be missing out on something more. So I want to reference something that perhaps you've been familiar with. I grew up as a kid loving to watch National Geographic programs, and also leafing through the magazines at my grandparents' house that were in this big box of all the different issues that they had had through the years of the National Geographic magazine. And a number of years ago, much later than my childhood, there was a study done on people that lived in what this article called blue zones. And they looked around the world to find groups or pockets of people that were experiencing longer life than the rest of the population. We're talking a higher percentage of people specifically that made it beyond 100 years old. And in fact, that's significant. Anybody that we know in our own context, or even in our communities, or even highlighted on the news in some channels that have made it past 100 years, that's a big deal, because living beyond 100 is not a common thing that we find in our world today. And so they looked at these, what they called blue zones, and they identified 4 locations. I encourage you to check out, even on your search engine, this article from National Geographic about blue zones. There was a book written about it, and they found that there were some commonalities in these 4 zones on how people lived their life, the experiences and choices that they were making that were the same in these 4 areas where a higher percentage of people were making it beyond 100 years of age. Well, what were those factors? Well, some of the key factors had to do with the very principles, interesting, that we've been dealing with here on balanced living. Well, what are those? That they got adequate sleep, that they had healthy and vibrant connections in their relationship, in their environment, in their family experience. They had regular, continuous exercise. They had plant-based diet largely in their nutrition, and these principles that we've been talking about were commonalities in these blue zones that people had made those choices. So what is it in our lives that can give us an advantage in making these positive choices? Because let's face it, all of us, whether it's been a New Year resolution or something that we know that is robbing us of certain things, have tried and had success and failure with making positive choices in our life, especially as it relates to health. But I would also stretch it out to say, included in that would be our spiritual well-being as well. So what are some strategies that we can practically employ to take charge of our health, not just physically, but spiritually as well? And so if you have a notebook, if you would like to jot this down, there's different ways that this has been described, but I want to take the next few moments and talk through what has been known as the 4 A's of positive choice. I'm going to list all of them, then we're going to take a little bit of time on each one. So if you were to think about this, the 4 A's can be identified as acknowledge, admit, accept, and address. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, I'm coming from a spiritual perspective, so I'm going to start with that first A of acknowledge. And acknowledge to this key step to a positive choice is acknowledging that I, as a human being, am created. I'm not my own, and that even my own health is a stewardship that God has given me. You know, if you think about that, there's some verses that would highlight this. Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 7 would give us an indication about that. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 19 and 20, where Paul asked the question, don't you know that you're not your own and that you're bought with a price? Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are His. We think about this, the Bible gives us a clear understanding that part of my making positive choices is a recognition that even if it were just simply based on the fact that no man is an island and that my choices are going to impact those in my own family circle and those around me, that my own health is a stewardship that's going to reflect positively or negatively on a Creator's design for my well-being and optimal health, right? So there's plenty of verses beyond the 2 that I just mentioned that would give us an insight into why, as we look at the connection between spiritual health and physical health, acknowledging that there is a designer behind my existence and that my health is a stewardship to following His design or my own as one of the key A's, or one of the 4 A's, in making a positive decision. The next one is an admission. And here's where the Christian really has power, where spiritual and health can come together in a different way to give us an advantage. And we've talked about the advantage that can exist from a believer following the principles that God has laid out. And the admission is to admit that on my own strength, lasting result for positive change is impossible. Yep, I'm going to say it again. On my own, in my own strength, lasting result for positive change is impossible. Oh, through fear or through other different ways, I can muster up enough strength or gas in the tank to make it a little way. But if I'm going to do something for the long haul, the right motivation and the right power are key to taking charge of our health. And that's where the verse Philippians 4:13 comes in. Jesus makes it clear, without Him, we can do nothing. But through Him, or with Him, all things are possible. So not only do I acknowledge that my own body and my health is a stewardship, right? That I belong to God, that I was designed and His way is the best way to experience optimal health. I admit that in my own power, I can't achieve that. And so I then open myself up to be able to have an assistance through God's power to experience not just a good spiritual life, but optimal health, because I'm using that power to make positive choices in my eating, sleeping, even simple things like sunshine and water throughout my daily, weekly, monthly, yearly routine, and I can experience those results. So after we acknowledge and we admit, we have to accept responsibility for the challenges that are in our life. And so there's a lot of ways that we could illustrate this, but I thought I would use an illustration that I think most of us are familiar with. Probably all of us at one point or another in growing up heard about the race between the tortoise and the hare. That's probably a familiar story that we have had. And it's an interesting thing because it has to do with this acceptance. You know, when you were looking at the outset, and all of us would have thought, hey, the winner of this race is clearly going to be the hare. The hare is more physically adept to compete in this race here against the tortoise. He can definitely run. He does it all the time in how he's going to get around. There's no fast movement in this tortoise whatsoever. Racing doesn't seem to be on his resume. And here's the challenge. In that confidence that happened, you know, which connects back to the previous one of where the power comes from, the hare ran out and didn't actually follow through, right, with what was going on in this race. And because of the initial success, actually got distracted to where the faithful, consistent plodding along of the tortoise, if you all remember the story right, was actually what won the race. And so what does that have to do with this idea of acceptance? Well, I have to accept that my biggest, worst enemy is myself. Because I'm going to make excuses for myself. I'm going to justify myself. I'm going to put it off to myself. And I found, and I hope you can be honest with yourself to find too, that you have been your best ally and your greatest enemy, because you and I have the ability to convince ourselves like no one else can. And the hope would be is that we would allow God to convince us even more than ourselves, but accepting that there's responsibilities that we have to take for our own choices is a key to making positive ones, right? And the last one then is address specific things in our life that we want to focus on. Now, that's really another way of saying make good goals. When we think about goals, there's goals that are unrealistic that we will never achieve, right? But when we think about our health and when we think about taking charge of it and change, which the choice to change is the difficult thing, we want to focus on some key areas that we can identify progress in and hold ourselves accountable to. That's part of the reason in each of these presentations we've given a short and very practical challenge that we hope you've taken advantage of to put some of these things into practice. But if through this experience you've seen, hey, I have a lot of stress and I really don't get enough sleep, or, hey, I have too much beverage consumption that has stimulants in it. Or, I don't eat enough fresh fruits and vegetables. Or, do you know what? I really don't take time out in my routine to have rest, both spiritually and physically. You know, there's unresolved, unhealthy issues in my family that I haven't dealt with. There's bitterness or unforgiveness in my experience that I really need to deal with. Whatever the case may be, that you would address some very key, very practical things in your life that you could choose to act on as part of making positive decisions. And we think about that, that's a cycle that we go through because, face it, every single one of us, every single day, before we experience anything at all in our life, have to make a choice. And so we're appealing here, I'm appealing, and we've been appealing through this entire series, that each of us would take charge, not just of our physical health, but of our spiritual health as well. You know, we want more than just a blue zone experience in this life. Don't get me wrong. I would love to live beyond 100 years of age, and not just live beyond 100 years of age, but have a vibrant and positive experience in my life where I'm experiencing all the good things that life has to offer. But much more than that, God's design for us in following these principles isn't just about what we can have here in 100 plus years, if that were the maximum that we could have on planet Earth. His desire and design is that we can have this holistic experience that would connect us in a relationship with him as stewards and following his design for what life and living it is supposed to be like, to where we could branch over into the part where sin and the challenges that we face here with disease and sickness and all of these factors are no more. And much more than a blue zone, we go into a gold zone where we live with him forever and ever. And so that's the appeal as we think about this. And we're coming to the end of balanced living. But I hope that you would not only take the time to go back and look at some of these challenges if you missed out on them, but that you would share this with some of your friends and family, because remember, God doesn't want us just to have a survival life, just to make it through day to day. God wants us to have an abundant life. But you know what? The steering wheel is only in God's hands if we choose to put it there. And that's why taking charge of our health comes back to that very beautiful yet elemental gift that he's given in making a choice to follow his way. I want to do that. Do you want to do that? Do you want to have abundant life and not just survival life? Well, let's use those 4 A's and make positive choices to connect ourselves with a power that would help us experience that reality.